That's the thing about walking back consistently. So the thing about walking back is that see how you're conceding so much ground? Now, if you walk back with a specific purpose in mind, I assume your walk back is to get your charge for your fireball. Instead of conceding so much ground, you can simply hold this ground. In order to hold this ground, all you gotta do is hold down back instead. So then by holding down back, it gives you enough time to react to anything, and then now you can put out your fireball without conceding all the ground of holding back. Alright, so on today's video, we're going to be watching some pristine Chun-Li. Okay, so going back here, I'm gonna be talking about this a little bit more on my channel, but essentially it's the idea of when you're a little bit too passive, you tend to find yourself walking back to the corner. I've talked about this before, but how do we go about combating this? When you're in the neutral, right? Your goal here should be ideally taking space from your opponent. When you're taking space from your opponent, you want to use certain normals, okay? So let's suppose we're in this case here, starting of the match, right? Instead of walking back here, right? Let's walk into them and use our superior buttons in order to get the space that we want. So let's suppose I take over here, right? And instead I walk forward into my opponent, right? And by doing so, it gives you the ability to get your offense started, right? And then by getting your offense started, now you can push your opponent, number one, closer to the corner, and number two, it gives you an opportunity to force you see what your opponent likes to do. That's the thing about walking back consistently. So the thing about walking back is that see how you're conceding so much ground? Now, if you walk back with a specific purpose in mind, I assume your walk back is to get your charge for your fireball. Instead of conceding so much ground, instead you can simply hold this ground. And in order to hold this ground, all you gotta do is hold down back instead. Right? So then by holding down back, it gives you enough time to react to anything, and then now you can put out your fireball without conceding all the ground of holding back. Because if you hold down back, it doesn't make you move, but if you hold back, it moves you back a lot. That said, the other thing you want to be super mindful of is walking back into EX is not going to get you as much value as putting out a slow one, walking behind it, and using your anti-airs to walk forward. Okay, so this right here was a good anti-air on your part. However, you need to have better drive management. If you realize that you don't have enough to drive rush off of, ideally you should be looking for routes that will kind of keep you a little bit safe. So let's suppose we're in this instance here. We, instead of going for button drive rush, we just decide to go for kicks instead of going for drive rush cancel, just because it forces yourself into a burnout situation, and now you're technically on the back foot, especially because your opponent has full meter. Just throwing this out there, right? This is just general knowledge, but just throwing this out there. If your opponent decides to come at you like this, right, we can check it. Okay, just throwing this out there, we can definitely check it, and then we can get our offense started from there. Right, just letting you know that like you should never be letting your opponent get away with something like this. And then on top of which, like I mentioned before, you can hold your ground quite well by simply just using the technique I told you about when it comes to holding down back. So by holding down back, not only gets you ready to anti-air, right? If you decide to go with standing medium kick, whatever option you decide to go with in this instance, right? It gives you enough time to be ready for this, and like whatever you want to do out of that instance, it'll leave you prepared. So one thing that I'm noticing immediately is that number one, they're just kind of like, we're just sitting there and just blocking everything. Okay, one thing that you're gonna have to come to terms with in this game is that if you sit there and just let your opponent do the thing to you, then more than likely the thing is going to be done to you. Okay, you have to either, if you're going to play this way, you're going to have answers to the things that are going on. That means that if they're whiffing buttons in your face, you're at the appropriate range to punish them, or ideally you should be trying to interrupt them with the method that I told before. So let's say that I'm in this instance that you were in. So let's say I'm in this instance you were in before. I'm gonna look for opportunities to try and get a whiff punish, right? So by putting myself in situations where I can potentially get the whiff punish, then now I can hopefully get the punish. Not sure why I'm not getting my forward. There it is. So I can hopefully get the punish, right? Another button that you should be using more, just because it's so ridiculous. This is a really good button to stick out there just to check your opponent, right? And once again, your opponent is doing a lot of spins. So if your opponent is doing a lot of spins, just make sure that you're going around checking it, because if you're not checking it, your opponent is getting away with a lot of things that they shouldn't be getting away with, and you can essentially enforce your will a lot easier if you're shutting down those sorts of options, right? Okay, a lot of what you're doing right now is that you're playing at an appropriate space, but the thing is, the key thing here is that you're not doing anything with this space. So you're playing at a space where you technically should. However, when you're at this range here, you're not technically doing anything that you can use to follow things up, because in order to get more advantage, right, we want to use our fireball. Number one, we can use our fireball to bait out spin, like so, right? We can use our fireball to bait out spin. Once our opponent stops realizing that we go through spin, or we know how the answer to spin, once they know that, they're going to stop doing it. Now that we're at this range, what do we want to do? We want to take space with this, right? We want to use low forward in order to gather space. These are the options that you should be taking advantage of in these ranges, right? By using these normals, you are now making it a lot more difficult for your opponent to approach you, right? Especially when you try to walk forward. I would suggest you walking forward with your stand jab, because your stand jab is ridiculous. And not to mention, your forward medium punch is one of the most ridiculous buttons in this game, right? As a whole. So off of this instance here, great back throw, great knowledge. You went for your throw, didn't work out. That's cool. Now in this situation here, instead of going for standing heavy punch, unfortunately in this game is not as good as 5, but it does have its unique uses. But ideally, instead of using standing heavy punch in this instance, I would suggest to you that you should start going for forward medium punch, just because forward medium punch is just such a better option to approach with, right? Now they're in this situation, right? You can poke at your opponent as much as you want, throw this out. It makes it really annoying for your opponent to deal with, especially when you're going for this a lot, right? Right? It makes it really, really annoying. The other thing that I noticed is that you immediately like backed up out of here and then tried to go for standing heavy punch, right? Instead of conceding this ground, control this space, right? Control this space. This is where the space you should be trying to control, okay? Once your opponent is in this box, this right here should be the space that you're trying to operate out of. Why? Because it's right out of low forward range. And then on top of which, if your opponent wants to try and press their low forward, it gives you the perfect opportunity to go for your own. Or if you want to slightly walk in, you can slowly walk in and get that party started. Let's talk about how passive this is. So somewhere along the way, you've become incredibly passive with this character, right? The thing is about playing this passive is that, number one, when you play passive like this, your reactions need to be spot on, okay? Because anything that happens, you need to be able to take advantage of it and go from there. But in this case here, we're playing passive with not everything all together, albeit you do have some decent anti-airs. But with that being said, reactions to the things that are happening on the map, knowing what options she has, we're not taking advantage of it. We just need to be a little bit more confident and hold forward at our opponent. And it might sound a little bit wild to say, but it truly is what needs to happen. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so off of this instance here, you gotta throw. Okay, what is next? You're so afraid of the fact that he might spin it that you are walking back into spaces where you feel comfortable. When you walk back into spaces, subconsciously your opponent is going to start noticing the fact that you like to do this. This is what we know as a bad habit. Okay, when you start showing this bad habit too often, your opponent starts immediately trying to go for it. Now, with that being said, their bad habit is immediately thinking that they're going to reach even if they press H, right? Notice how the frequency of how often they're going for it, because you'll do the same walk back and then you'll try to go for it again, right? Every time you walk back, they're thinking a fireball is coming, and then in those cases, they're gonna try and go for spin. Okay? The other thing that I want you to start using is I want you to start using your other versions of fireball, because it looks like you very rarely use the other versions of your fireball. You're going for EX a lot. So let's say you go for fireball here, right? In the case that you go for fireball here, then we can then get an option that is more advantageous. So let's say we're in this situation here, right? It gives us enough time to get the charge that we want and at the same time hit them for whatever meaty we want and go from there, right? So the key point is knowing the spaces in which you want to hold ground and which spaces you want to kind of just go for your fireball DP game. Off of that game, you can now force them into a guessing situation, right? And that is the beauty in being able to use your different fireballs. By doing so, we're forcing them into a very uncomfortable game, and it just makes the game so much less enjoyable for your opponent, especially if they feel like you're always going for anti-airs, right? Make their lives a lot harder than it should be. That's the goal. Okay, so I always teach this, okay? Ideally, all right, you should be looking for something, all right? What do I mean by this? Let's suppose in this instance, I get knocked down, right? If I, as the player, think that they're going to go for throw, I have different options for throw. So let's say for Chun-Li's sake, right, we get hit trying to do something. Let's say our opponent is trying to go for throw. I might go for that option, right? Because this will beat the option. It'll leave them in counter hit or punish counter, and then we can get the rest off of it, right? If we feel like our opponent is going to go for a walk back, we can also use this to take advantage of the situation at hand, right? Right, this is a good way to take. So what I'm doing here is that I'm going for a delay medium kick. Why is this good? It's because if you go for a delay medium kick here, if they decide to go for throw, you'll get hit, no punish counter, no whatever. You'll get counter hit, but counter hit doesn't add any extra damage to it, right? But if you are correct, then you get, you know, something off of it. Obviously, in this case, you don't necessarily get everything you want, but you know, you do get a decent amount off the situation at hand, right? And then from here, you can play your fireball game that we've already went over, and you can close out the game like that, right? But that's the value that it gives you, right? You can also use this to kind of control space and go from there, right? These are the options that you have available to you. Instead of just kind of sitting there and trying to block out a situation and going for delay tech all the time, let's show different options. So let's talk about this closing sequence here, okay? A lot of what you're doing right now is you're sitting around and hoping something's gonna save you, or they're gonna do something completely stupid and then it'll allow you to come back. Okay, this is all you're doing in this case. You're just kind of sitting around waiting for someone to save you. Guess what? No one's coming to save you. With that being said, by being this passive and continually using your fireball, especially when looking at the resources available, Okay, I always say this. Look at your resources, look at your opponent's resources, because this dictates how you're going to play the game and which options they're most likely to choose. In this case here, you have less than 30% of health, about 4.25 bars a meter, and full bars, which means that we could possibly do something that could kill if we get one more hit or one more throw. We could go into something that could kill if we use all resources. On the other end, okay, the Kami player has level 3, and that's the most important part, and as well as they have full drive gauge. Now, the reason why this is important is because this dictates the next choices that you make. Once you're at a health bar that will most likely kill you, you cannot decide or choose to use Fireball anymore, because if your opponent reacts, then you're dead. Okay, so these are the things that I want you to focus on a little bit more often, that being more confident in your presses, walking towards your opponent instead of ducking them. Now, if you're going to play that back and forth game, I want to make sure that you're going for options that are a little bit better in regards to whiff punishing. So that means using your forward medium punch, that means using your low forward in order to punish the options that they are showing you on a consistent basis. Lastly, make sure that you're checking Kami spin, because as of right now, you're not checking it. Now, with that being said, any questions?